As promised, my fellow Canadian, Peter Scholz, is going to be joining us in just 1 second. Peter has impressed me immensely as somebody who has done more rigorous work on charting out the development potentials, the resources, the different pathways to actualize the building up of Canada's Mid-Canada Shield, the Arctic, and so much more. So very, very happy to introduce a freelance transport and town planner, Peter Scholz. Peter, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here. Good morning, man. Good morning, Matt.
Yeah, well, I asked you today, you've done so much work. I've heard your presentations on many an occasion. I've been immensely impressed. And I think that if we are going to be able to embark upon the 21st century with a healthier new system, your quality of thinking is going to be really important. So I just want to give you carte blanche to just showcase anything that you think is important to the idea of the emerging world of Arctic cooperation, the Bering Strait discussion, anything you want to do in this degree, it's all yours. I give it to you.
Well, thank you very much, Matt. I will try to keep it fairly tight. If you like, you can share the link to another interview where, you did give me carte blanche, and that was 3.5 hours long. So if people want to dig into more details on these kind of facts, they can. So my story is I am a transportation planner registered with the Institute of Transportation Engineers in Washington, D.C., and I'm a registered professional planner with town planning in Alberta. I had lived in Nunavut for 10 years, and I was recruited by Alaska to Alberta Railway to help them build a railway from, figure out through the preliminary work for a railway from Alaska to Alberta, and that was in 2020. Best team I've ever worked for. We were taking an Indigenous focused approach where it'd be Indigenous owned 49% and those kinds of things. But there was some rotten smells coming out of the ventilators, and the chairman was caught with his hand in a cookie jar, is the way I put it in a nice way. And the Ontario Securities Commission got involved, and they shut us down. And the company was declared bankrupt, and the assets were seized by a bankruptcy agent. And they deemed the project to be of zero value, would not sell it for any price. And, no one's severances were paid, for example. So in my case, I ended up being laid off holding my fourth daughter, who was then 2 weeks old, in my arms. I had brought her to the meeting to show the team, because everything's virtual. And that was that. And I found out later that there was a buyer through a source I can't mention, and who the buyer was I can't mention, and I can't mention who the bankruptcy agent was on air. But when I found out that the sale had been turned down, as the assets being zero value, I had some questions in my mind that have not really been satisfied, because we had engineering diagrams, we had existing relationships, we had MOUs with First Nations, we had routes picked out, we had some early permitting done, we had initial work for an environmental assessment report. It was all, it was land right-of-way agreements with landholders. Like surely that's worth more than zero, right? We had been doing real work. So anyway, I put it aside. I had been doing some route stuff while I was there, and said, as a mental health exercise, I took a few notes, and then I set it aside for 2 years. And then early 2023 was still nagging at the back of my head. So I was now living in Alberta, because I had relocated from Nunavut to Alberta for this job. And now I made the transition to freelancing.
And I just want to say this before you go on. I just want to say this quickly. For those who may not know, this experience that you just described, before the actual hand of the cookie jar and all of those tragic experiences and running into all of the invisible walls, was given an actual federal endorsement by none other than Donald Trump in September of 2020, which did shake things up, because this was being looked at by people in very high levels at that time, at least, pertaining to the Alaska to Canada, the Alaska to Alberta rail idea. So the fact that you had so much momentum behind it, and then so many unnecessary obstructions that got in the way, both internally within that agency, but also externally. These are all very important things. Just for people who are listening may not know this, these are really important dramas, which should be kept in mind. So I'll let you continue on as you were shifting gears and looking for a new way of putting your knowledge to good use.
Oh yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's a bit of a house of cards going on. I come from a planning background and more of a technical background, and I've branded myself as just being someone that understands the geography, the geotechnical risks and options, potential costs, and understands the roles of the indigenous groups as being the traditional stewards of the land, that they view themselves as being appointed by the creator to be stewards of their traditional territories. Some people may agree with that, some people not, but the fact is they view themselves that way, and I view that. If someone views themselves and says, I'm the steward of, my people are the steward of this area, I'm going to respect that, whether or not I agree with them on a religious perspective, because they've been there for thousands of years and they have knowledge of it. So, the reason A2A hired me when it did was because Trump issued the cross-border permit at the Alaska-Yukon border. So there was increased enough certainty enough that they were willing to start hiring people to look more on the Canadian side. But what I'm going to be sharing today is a sort of a very high-level recap of routing information, so people understand basically the layout of the land, literally. And I will touch briefly, because I know the audience is interested in the Bering Strait. I have not looked at it at a close level, and in the current geopolitical situation, I don't foresee myself doing that. But geopolitics change minute by minute sometimes.
Well, I'll just say just quickly, the reason why I asked you to incorporate that into today's presentation is simply because since it was circulated just a month and a half, 2 months ago by Kirill Dmitriev, a representative of the Kremlin, this image has imprinted itself on a lot of people's minds. And currently I am in Sochi for a film festival. And I'll tell you, a lot of Russians are very, very passionate about the idea of the Arctic and especially the Bering Strait. So that's something that I'm just seeing more and more in the conversation, including now in North America, which I haven't seen before because of this type of intervention. So I appreciate that you're humoring me by introducing a little bit of the consideration into your general outline.
I appreciate that. And the reality is, I appreciate the Russian enthusiasm. Canada is the sticking point, technically, and getting through Canada is a lot harder issue than you think. And most Canadian, I see lines going from the point of Alaska and just connecting some point semi-randomly in Canada. I'm going like there is volumes of information in that crayon line that need to be considered. And I'm going to do a very, very high level survey of that. And I'm basically a teaser. If you really are interested, go to that 3.5 hour posting and we'll get into more technical. You can go into more technical detail.
Yeah, that's going to be in the description box under this video very soon. So check that out, people. Okay.
So, the story of share screen. Okay. Let's go 2 monitors. Okay. Share screen. Okay. Window. No, I want entire screen and I want that one. Okay, good. Okay, so this map had its earliest days in 2020 when the project died, and or 2021. The project died. The first version of this, I was making the map. I was literally crying. There was wet on my cheeks because this was my passion. And it became sort of a mental health exercise because I had so much information in my head. I just needed to get it out so I could move on. And I put it aside for 2 years. And then in 2023, I had made the transition to freelancing, and it was still niggling in the back of my head. I'm like, what if? Why not? The project did not fail for good reasons. And I called up a couple dozen. Matt, are you still there? I don't see your subscreen anymore.
I am indeed. Don't worry. I just wanted to give you full full access to this one.
Yeah. So I called up a couple of dozen First Nations and I said, we or my team had been in contact with you 2 years ago, and were you actually genuinely interested? And all of them said yes, but we want to be part of this from point -1. We want to be there from before early planning stages. So I began a process of revising the map that had started. My primary sources of information were the Rail Atlas at the University of Alberta Archives, which included many hundreds of maps that were created mainly in the early 19th century when there was a bit of a rail boom in Canada. And a lot of visionaries were thinking which train could go where. So, and then the A2A information from the company I'd worked before, some of which was, the details may be under NDA, but you can't copyright the Earth, right? If there's a line on a map, you can't copyright. You can copyright the details of that line because there's more work in the detail than in the general identification. Anyway, so on this map you're looking at, there are 4 colors. If the color is red, it means there is a train there. If the color is orange, that means there is a deactivated railway, which is of interest to us because it means you can put a train there because there was a track there. If it's green, it means somebody who, with either an engineer or a surveyor qualification, put that line on a map sometime in the last 110 years. And if it is yellow, that means I have looked at the route. It is suitable topographically. That means gradients and curvature. Trains do not like turning left or right, especially when they're mile-long trains moving at 80 or 100 kilometers an hour and have, 1,500 meters of rail cars behind them. They do not like turning. They really don't like going up or down. These things are 280,000 pounds a car times 300 cars. So we're looking at 1% gradient maximum, avoiding areas of significant topography, tunneling, etc. And actually looking into detail. So that's where this map came from. And for those engineers in the audience, what I have found when I'm talking to an engineer one-on-one is they look at this map and they go, yeah, so what? Show me the data. Prove it. So then I go to this screen and I say, here's your data. And so you're seeing here a smattering, and I'm not going to go over these lines in great detail, but this is drawing out the lines. The white line is the A2A line, which was proven out. And for example, I'll zoom in on this pass here. Where are we? Summit Lake. There we go. Okay. Here's a good example of the level of detail I took this to prove outline. So a lot of the lines going from Bering Strait into Canada go through this pass. They don't realize they go through this pass because they're just following the Alaska Highway, but they go through this pass because they're following the Alaska Highway, and you're looking at the Alaska Highway. The gradient on the east side is bad for trains. It's more than 1%, but it's sort of doable. And here is, oh, by the way, it's a lovely place. If you ever get out here, there's a lovely hike up this mountain. I highly recommend it, but it's really hard to get to. Lovely lake. We're at 1335 meters. Now you see the highway just goes down this, whatever, But down over here, it's 1,100 meters. So there's a 250 meter gradient between this lake and this river. This is only about 5 kilometers. So the cars and the trucks are going down at 8-9% gradient. Trains can do 1%. How do you get around this? Well, I said, let's side cut all the way up this valley, like 5-10 kilometers, and notice it's going across a rather scary looking erosion slope, 2 of them, and it's going past a rubble field. And then it's making a sharp curve. What is a sharp curve? It's usually a spiral tunnel. So it's going in, it's spiraling around inside the mountain and coming back out again, and going back all the way back down again. So this is equivalent to something you'd see a Kicking Horse Pass. It's doable. It's very expensive. And there's also permafrost in this area. So it's side cutting along a mountain is hard. Side cutting along a mountain that is eroding is harder. Side cutting along a mountain that is eroding with permafrost underneath you, which could melt once you expose it, is really hard, really expensive. So what does this end up? When I look at this loop, I get numbers like, $200 million, $300 million just for this. Okay. And that's to get the train down. And then oh, there's another crazy drop over here. So the train has to make this crazy loop-to-loop to try to hold to 1% gradient. But picking out where this could potentially go, this takes time. So this map, the raw data, and with all those loops, I'm able to stay sort of at a 1% gradient, right? So that's an example. I have done that for all of these colored lines across this map. And that takes time. So I've put about 2,000 hours into the map. There's your raw data. And
that's remarkable. And that's just to bring the consideration of the inclination or the gradient change. That's all this is, that you had to do this immense amount of work. And that's not even factoring in the resource deposits where the preferable. Okay. All right. Wow.
Yes. So it's Canada is always like this it's almost like a black box for world transportation planners. And they're like, oh, we'll put ships through the Northwest Passage. Well, that sounds easy. Canada has the most complex ice conditions in the world by far. In each pass between each of those islands is a different ice story with a different ecological considerations, right? So with Russia, in the Russian mindset, you have a fairly straight Siberian coastline. You've got a few islands offshore, but basically in the wintertime, the ice extends from the North Pole down to the coast. And in the summertime, the ice extends from the coast and moves back up again towards the North Pole. And you have 40 icebreakers and you run along the North Coast. That is your Northeast Passage. It's fairly straightforward. I'm going to a shipping summit next week, and I'm spending a half hour just talking about a few passes, the ice conditions and a few passes in the islands up there. I'm not talking about Northwest Passage. I'm talking about getting to Bering Strait. But there it is. It's the same sort of situation on the terrain. So the way I summarize this, so I showed the GIS system basically. So there's raw data behind this thing, and to just give one example, and there's dozens to hundreds of examples of this. You could also tunnel, but again, tunneling, the rule of thumb is $1 million a meter in Canada, and that's not including permafrost stuff. So up here in the north, depending on your permafrost conditions, and this is peri-permafrost area, so you may not have to worry about it too much. The permafrost may only go down 50 meters or so. But in the higher situation, when you're dealing with the tunnel, where the ground is frozen down 0.5 kilometer, you're building a tunnel through ice. What does that mean in terms of vibrations and freezing and the way ice moves when it's under consistent pressure? The tunneling and those kinds of things get really scary really quickly in terms of costs and potential risks. So anyway, the way I summarize this tangle of lines for folks is there's basically two options if you're getting up to Alaska. If you're going through British Columbia, you can see my cursor there.
Yep.
Because the pass I just showed you was deliberately chosen because it's over here. I tried figuring out the route around it. Again, this yellow line is about as ugly as this green line. The yellow line means I wrote it. The green line means somebody else did. It's still, you're looking at these crazy engineering efforts. So I highlighted this one in part because Fort Nelson is often the connector point showing on your maps coming from the Bering Strait. And that's just one issue, getting to Fort Nelson. Once you get into Fort Nelson, the railway from Fort Nelson down to Chetwynd is full of canyons, and it was designed for resource extraction trains that are maybe 10 or 20 cars long, moving at 20 kilometers an hour, carrying logs and wood chips, maybe some gravel. Upgrading that line to a class 1 would be more expensive than just picking a whole new class 1. So I don't regard this as a legitimate option for the Bering Strait connection. If you're going through British Columbia, I focus down on Dease Lake as your primary option, and that basically has to do with the way the glaciated valleys in British Columbia align and they converge at Dease Lake. Now you see an orange dotted line coming in here. Mm-hmm. There's track bed all the way there. It's proven out. Once you get to Dease Lake, there you can go up through central Yukon, through Watson Lake this way, or you can go through Stikine Plateau and then connect with the Alaska Highway Corridor, which also aligns with the Yukon, Alberta, Yukon, Alaska natural gas right away up to Alaska. That would be your cheapest route. I'm not going to talk about the political situation in British Columbia at the present time, but it would be difficult. If you're going through Alberta, which is your primary alternative, all because of the way the rivers converge, the river canyons, you're basically looking at a convergent point at Fort Vermilion, which is a very small, very lovely settlement where Treaty 8 was signed, Treaty 8 with the First Nations there, and you're crossing the Peace River there. You can see a red line dotting down here and say, well, why can't we just cross in another location? Well, the reason for that is this, again, is a resource extraction railway. It's intended for 20, 30 kilometers an hour. Rebuilding it to Class 1 standard costs more than a resource, than just building a new one. And getting through Peace River, you're going down 250 meters, and then you're going up again at 2.5% grade with higher speed limits in the winter than the summer, because when the ground is frozen in the winter, they can travel faster safely. These are not considerations you're looking at a Class 1 rail. When a Class 1 rail, I'm meaning the trains that are 1.5 kilometers long, moving at 80 to 100 kilometers an hour. They do not like going left or right. They really don't like going up or down. You're looking for flat, straight. And whenever you're encountering these major geographical hurdles, you're spending a lot of money to get through them. Tunnels, bridges, etc. So you converge at Fort Vermilion, and then you would go cross the Liard at this point. I can spend a lot of time talking about why you want to cross the Liard at this point. Just trust me at this stage, because I don't want to spend hours. Entering through the toe of the Yukon and converging at Watson Lake, and then probably going up through central Yukon again, and the two options converge at Tok, Alaska. Now, resources.
And a lot of people don't know this, but there is no rail connection. Just so it's very clear in the audience's mind, because we have people listening from Europe and from all over North America, and even me in Canada, I didn't know this until not that long ago. There was no rail between Alaska and Alberta or British Columbia. There's there's a significant amount of missing, even though there was a lot of discussion and momentum in the 60s, 50s, and 60s to building that. It just stopped. So what you're calling for right now is finally fitting that gap together that would bring us into the Arctic, into Alaska in a serious way.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. So we'll just highlight that orange and red lines. Our northern boat, we have an existing railway ending at Prince Rupert, and then we have a railway that was started and never finished going to Dease Lake. There's a whole story why it was started and not finished. I'm not going to go into that. Fort Nelson, I've taught the spur that ends there. I've explained why this one is not suitable. And then there's another one over here, which ends at Hay River on Great Slave Lake. Again, a resource extraction, slow speed railway. And that's the end of it. That's as far north as the network goes. It never has gone. There is a red line over here. This is a narrow gauge railway between Skagway, Alaska, and Carcross, Yukon. It's used only as a tourism service. It used to extend into Whitehorse. It is a narrow gauge railway, and it is at a 2% grade, even with a lot of engineering works going in here. And Skagway is a very narrow port, so it's not really Class 1 friendly. It's something that I could see being used to help supply rails to the real train if we decide to go through Whitehorse. But that's a whole other story, which I'm not going to go into the potential construction phasing stage in this conversation. I did want to mention the 3 resource hotspots in Canada.
You read my mind. That's exactly what I was going to ask you. Okay, great. Yeah. All right, go for it.
So there's 3 that people should know about. Number 1 is the so-called Golden Triangle, and that is extending roughly from Stewart, British Columbia, more or less paralleling the Alaska British Columbia border, and ends just south of Dease Lake. Within this triangle, I have 3 major deposits shown. Red Chris Mine, which is operational, Galore, and KSM. But below that layer, there's another 30 potentially mineable deposits with everything in them. And Carney, I believe yesterday, Prime Minister Carney issued a statement of interest about this region and its importance to Canada and the West for its resource wealth, which is easily in the tens of billions of dollars. The other hotspot is a bit out of our discussion zone, but it's the Slave Geological Province, which roughly is where you see this road proposal. Izok is one of the major deposits in the area. Again, what shows up on different maps has changed, but again, there's 20 or 30 deposits with everything in them, from diamonds to gold to ore to zinc in this region. The West Kitikmeot is not very friendly to rail. It's a rolling terrain with a lot of rocky outcrops, surrounded by frozen marsh, marshy permafrost all around. So really, you're only getting roads in there. Right now, it's serviced by ice roads, which is the reason that an all-weather road has been proposed to. The idea is to get the minerals to the coast, which would then be pulled out in the summertime, the ice-free season, by barge. They've talked about the potential military purposes of this road, but I don't see it. But anyway, that is another hotspot. And then the third hotspot that is relevant to our discussion, there's another one farther east, but I won't go in, and there's the Ring of Fire in Ontario, but I won't go into those because we're talking about Bering Strait. Is sort of central and eastern Yukon. So what we have here, and this is a publicly available information. Kantong, to my knowledge, was the primary source of tungsten in the West. It's been mined out. Mactung is the new primary source of tungsten in the West. There's been a lot of interest from the North American federal governments on how to access this tungsten, and there's engineering studies underway for upgrading road access to the McMillan Pass area. There's also a major zinc deposit at McMillan Pass. And going up the area, there's another significant deposit at Gaina, I believe heavy ores, zinc if I'm not mistaken. And then Crest is the one that nobody's heard about. 16 billion tons of high-grade iron ore. That is a billion tons of ore at Crest, which is on the Yukon NWP border. You're never getting that stuff out by road. And then there's other deposits like Andrew, that could or could not. There's Kudzakaya, Wolverine. These other Yukon has a bad history. Like Wolverine was developed by a Chinese firm, and they didn't do their engineering right, so they had to shut down the mine after like 6 months, and then there was this massive cleanup cost, and they didn't do security properly. So there's been another story of a frozen dam core failing at a different mine near Mayo, like about 6 months ago. Yukon has a bad history of mining companies cutting corners, and that has not helped us at all. And when I hear those things, when I hear about with modern technology and modern engineering methods of these kinds of failures, I just shake my head. I'm like, you are not helping anybody when you cut corners, because you destroy the reputation of the mining industry. You destroy the interest in resource development, and you empower folks that believe that anything people touch is turned to crap. And they are then when you show these industrial concepts, they feel empowered to oppose them because of what's happened in the past. And that definitely makes things more difficult for folks like me. But anyway, there's Casino, another major zinc deposit, which
on that note too. I mean, I think Hollywood also doesn't help, but we're several generations into a lot of conditioning where, on the one hand, you actually have very bad behavior from industrial firms that clear crop forests, that have done a lot of damage to the environment, undoubtedly. But then it's the idea that there could be a sane way that industry and infrastructure develop in a big way without destroying nature and ecosystems is not even discussed. And we go to the other extreme, as I felt in my heart for many, many years, just having been through the education system. I saw the idea of a rail was, for me, just reprehensible. The idea of an industry smokestack was disgusting. I got a visceral emotional feeling looking at these things, until it took many years for me to sort of put on different glasses and start reappreciating why these things have been so rapacious, so destructive. And it can't be oversimplified or else we do a lot of damage. So I appreciate that nuance that you're.
No, I thank you very, very much. No, I appreciate that. And, the government response to these disasters has been to establish more and more and more regulation. And then they hire people out of university that have perspectives similar to what you or I had when we got out of university, which is industry is bad. And then you put them in charge of these regulatory processes. So then you end up with the situation we have now, where it takes 20, 25 years to get a permit. And then it gets delayed and delayed and delayed by this silly thing or that silly thing, or some junior regulator saying, oh, I need one extra piece of information. Sorry, you'll have to delay your startup by another year. This happens again and again and again. But so I'm seeing both sides of the story. By bringing this up at this stage in this context, we're all in this together. And when we talk about this railway and all these potential mining and other economic activities that could be empowered by this railway through Canada, I think we need to, we need to develop a culture where we're sort of a community culture. We're all sort of watching out for each other. So no one's going to tell me that a frozen core dam failed and there wasn't an engineer somewhere that was watching it. Like, so somebody was aware, somebody was ignoring the signals. So that can't happen anymore. We need to have a culture where we're doing nation building together. And, that's one thing I have found is when we do talk about nation building in this sort of context, I get a real feeling of community with people, other end of the country, people I've never met before. It's like, yeah, we're building a better country together. What are the things we need to know? And, I've been able to add some contributions saying these are the route options and these are where the resources are. But I'm also being upfront and open about this are the pitfalls that have hurt us before. And they're political, some are real. And there's a feedback mechanism. If we all look at this together, like if it's not just an engineer says, oh, I'm not going to ignore that warning sign on this design, but it's like, if I do my job badly, this could shut down a tens of billions dollar railway. It could hurt future generations. It's going to destroy the reputation of the industry. Suddenly it's like, yeah, I'm an integral part of a machine, of a nation building machine, of a Canadian advancement, and I'm damaging that. So everyone is going to have to take that perspective of very high responsibility. So with that, I'll move across the border into Alaska, unless you have any remaining questions on Canada.
No, but I do want to just repunctuate, just because what you said is so important, that when you're doing real nation building, the way you're showing how it used to be done and how it can and should be done again, you're really also doing citizen building, right? You're reshaping in a healthy way the identities of those individuals who will make up the government, who will make up the democratic society, which means that it could only work when the citizen has a moral and intellectual vested interest as their subjective self into the objective health of the society that they were born into. And that means they have to appreciate, where did they come from? What is required to sustain the next generation to come after? And when people have that, then the decisions that they make when they go to vote, when they think about what policies are shaping my world, are going to be coming from a much higher a place of wisdom. And that's a society that can govern itself. And that's the type of nonlinear but very real transformation that we're talking about, which we haven't seen in so long. So I just want to really punctuate that it's not just rail on a graph, it's not just resources, it's not just turning resources into money, although that happens, but it's this transformative power of the society as a whole on every level, intellectual, spiritual, cultural, physical as well. So
thank you very much. Yeah, no, I agree with that wholeheartedly. So as I said, both options come in at Tok. Costing, the price of steel has gone up. I'm using a sliding scale. I've looked at each link independently. I've used a range of between $1.5 million per kilometer for building a railway on flat prairie that needs a 50 centimeter ballast base to $20 million a kilometer for side cutting on mountains where there may be some permafrost and you need to stick thermosiphons in the ground to keep the ground frozen, those kinds of things. And that's not including regulatory costs, land holding costs, those kinds of things. So construction costs alone, not including all the other overhead, coming in through British Columbia, because there is an existing rail bed there, I'm estimating the cost on this line coming in at somewhere between $25 and $35 billion. And remember, you have to add to that all the regulatory administration, securing lands, those royalty fees, whatever, those kinds of things. So it's going to be more like add 5 to 10 billion to that. Okay. Mm. If you're coming on this way, it's about 10 billion more than that. So somewhere between 35 and $45 billion to get into Tok from this route. This route is more expensive because there's more permafrost. There's 3 major bridges, and it's more new build. Okay. Now, once you get to Tok, A2I did do all the engineering to get down to Valdez, which in my mind is a complete waste of time. Valdez is a great port. It's deep water, but it does not have enough frontage for the kind of traffic we're anticipating. If you have a rail link connecting Memphis and Chicago and Miami to Alaska, to Tidewater, a manufacturer in Alabama can go, do I really care if I go to Long Beach, California, or Seattle, and I have a 2 or 3 week delay because the ports there are full or they're on strike or something? Or if I ship an extra 3,000 kilometers to Alaska, which is also ice-free, or Prince Rupert for that matter, but in this case, we're talking about Alaska. I may pay more for my rail shipping, but then my product isn't sitting at the port for 2 or 3 weeks waiting to get onto a boat. So the estimates that I have seen are that Anchorage and region, that Alaska as a whole would be covering about 20 million tons in its first year of operation once it's connected to the lower 48, rapidly moving up to 70 to 80 million tons over the next 20 to 30 years. Are those numbers accurate? I would like to check them, but they also pass the sniff test. When you look at the amount of trade going through U.S. West Coast ports, that alone, without all the resource development, is enough to build a railway. Okay, so Valdez is not big enough for a port. So I view the only option is moving from Tok up to the current limit of the Alaska Railroad, which is at a village of North Pole, and then there would have to be some upgrades along the existing Alaska Railroad to upgrade it to a Class 1 standard. It's not that bad. It could be upgraded for about $1 billion, the whole system. And then you have 4 ports to pick from, all of which are ice-free. There's Anchorage, there's Port Mackenzie, which is basically ready to go. They even have the rail right-of-way ready to go. And then there's Whittier and there's Seward. Would there be passenger capacity for this? Yeah. Do I think Americans, if there's a train that goes from Seward to Miami on a hotel on rails, would Americans want to take that? With 400 million Americans wanting to see their whole country in one giant train ride? Yeah, I think there's a real market there. It was never looked at. But you just think about it, it's like everyone would want to take that, at least once in their brain to see it. And take 400 million Americans, and then what percentage can afford to do it, and how many do they want to do it? And, you get back of the envelope. Yeah, there's a worthwhile train ride. Now, moving on from there, you can see my map is blank. My map is blank because I have not looked at it in any level of detail. And, I put 2,000 hours to get the map this far. If someone wants me to do the same analysis over getting the rest of the way to Bering Strait, give me a call. Sorry. So, but I have had a very quick look. I threw this line together in 3 hours. So take it for what it's worth. It is a crayon, as far as I'm concerned. Getting to the Bering Strait from the existing Alaska Railroad over here. I did this in 3 hours when Putin was in Anchorage, just for fun, because it was on everybody's mind. I felt inspired to do it. The synopsis is I didn't come across any significant elevation changes. It was up to 350 meters above sea level back down. Nothing you really worry about across 1,200 kilometers. What did worry me is so much of the terrain looks like that. That is permafrost terrain. When you see permafrost terrain and you want to put a train on it, you're doing one of two things, or you're doing both. You're sticking a thermosiphon in the ground every 10 feet. The thermosiphon is like a freezer that has a cold end to it, so it releases heat out of the top. And you put a little solar panel at the top, so it has power to run. You need to put one of those in every 10 or 20 feet. That's about $10,000 each, $20,000 each for thermosiphon, and then you need to power them. As I said, maybe solar work, maybe you need a battery pack. And then you need to put enough. Remember, this is mush. Okay, this is frozen mush that you're sitting on. This is swampland. So you need to put a clay layer down for stability, and then you need to put a stupid amount of gravel on it. The clay layer provides some stability because it tends to sort of solidify a bit. But then it also prevents water from seeping up and the permafrost from basically eating what you put above it. And it basically making a bulge in the permafrost zone, which is it's completely unfair. Permafrost does not fight fair. And when I look at terrain like this, and when I've seen the engineering, is usually have a 6 meter to 9 meter ballast base underneath the track.
Okay.
That is a 4-story house.
It's an immense amount of digging that needs to be done just to get through that. Yeah. So, okay, all right. So, big challenges for future engineers to tackle. Okay, so we noted. So let's keep on moving towards it.
Huh? Yeah, absolutely. So factor 15 to 20 billion bucks to get from Fairbanks to the Bering Strait tunnel. Okay. So add that on. So 15 to 20 billion bucks. Add that on to the 30, 40, 50 I said about getting to Fairbanks. You've now got to the Bering Strait. Okay. Congratulations. So I'm being real, and then I think it can be done, but it's the resources required to make it are significant.
No, I love the realism. This is good. This is people need to challenge to chew on this stuff. Yeah. Okay. So this is now the Bering Strait that we're looking at, and what do we got on
this is
in
the
front
Bering
of us?
Strait. Yeah. So this envisions not an underground tunnel, which would be 100 kilometers long, but 2 floating tunnels. A floating tunnel is a Scandinavian technology, and it's basically, you think of an concrete oval segments that are then linked together and then submerged, and they're in the water, but anchored to the seabed, and they're deep enough down that the ships can pass over them without having to worry about it. I think that would be a lot cheaper than digging, and I think also a lot safer because there are some fault lines through here. The main North American plate fault line is over in Chukotka, but there are some fault lines going through the Bering Strait. That's why it's there. There is some earthquake risk. If I'm in a 100-kilometer long tunnel and I'm 50 meters below the seabed and there is an earthquake, I feel like we're asking for trouble. If it's floating 50 meters, 50 feet below the surface, anchored to these lovely stone seamounts that are all in a line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. To me, it just, an engineer might look at it, but I think it makes more sense.
Yeah, so I think would it be the case that there would be more degree of flexibility? So if the ground does seem to is moving a lot because of a big earthquake, the anchors would also be more flexible and wouldn't necessarily just destroy the tunnel.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And also there's some major currents through here, but because the tunnel doesn't have to be straight, the tunnel can curve a little bit, give it some flex and way. Mm-hmm. So engineers can work around that. So that I would see the train going on a causeway out to where the water is about 50 feet deep, and then entering the tunnel would enter the water. 50 feet is only like 20 meters, so it's actually, trains don't care. That's not a big issue for them. You're not dealing with gradient slopes. You come up for air at the Little Diomedes Island, build a causeway or a bridge across the Big Diomedes Island. That is where the US-Russian interchange would be, or exchange, whatever. And then sink back down. And again, this is 35 kilometers underwater each segment. 35 kilometers is not a freaky number in my mind. There's plenty of tunnels and bridges that are more than 35 kilometers nowadays. You come to another causeway and you enter Russia. Now, I have not looked in detail, as I mentioned. I've did a quick scan online. I found this map. So whoever did this map And if you can find the guy that wrote it, I'd love to talk to him. But it shows 3,500 kilometers to Yakutsk of new build. And because the line wiggles the way it does, it tells me they've put some thought into where it's going to go. Where I like to go is, why did you pick that particular wiggly line and another wiggly line that's right next to it? Right. That's where my brain comes in. What are the other options? Mm-hmm. That's what I like to look at in detail. But anyway, I'm taking that it's official. So Yakutsk to Namau, which is I believe the name of the community on the Chukotka side, 3,500 kilometers. There is some talk in the Russian government about extending the line from Yakutsk and then going to the sea at Magadan, which would cut your overall distance by, I don't know, down to 2,800 kilometers from this point up to Chukotka. But again, you're dealing with terrain that is, I'll just pick a random point. Mountains, permafrost, valleys. So Russian construction costs are a lot less, but you're dealing with significant costs on the Russian side as well. And then you have your bridge. Would this thing work? Oh yeah. If you're connecting into the Chinese industrial heartland across to North America, the people if it's double track, I think it would be full like the first day, and the ports would still be running at full capacity. So that's my 20-cent tour of the Bering Strait.
Yeah, no, Peter, thank you so much. I really appreciate the rigor. Like I said, I always find this refreshing. It's so easy to draw lines on a map and to play the world like it's a game of Sims, but to actually see somebody who's been on the ground, who's thought through the variables, I really, really appreciate that. And I'll just add a couple of quick images here. The reason why I'm actually in Sochi, for those who may not know, that I was invited to speak or to have my film presented at a film festival. So my wife, myself, Jason Dahl, our filmmaking friend, put together something called the Arctic Theater of War or International Cooperation about a year ago. And it really went through a history of the idea of the Bering Strait Tunnel as a concept, the idea of cooperation among sovereign nations, starting at the Civil War, even a bit before and going through to the present, and the various moments in history where we came close. And there is something that is featured in this video that caught my eye some time ago, featuring a map, which I'm going to just pull up here super quickly. And of course, it's not showing up. Oh, I want to. Oh, there it is. So right there is an 1890 map called Gilpin's American Economic Just and Correct Map of the World, featuring this entire grid of rail networks. That, of course, the feasibility studies weren't done in a rigorous way, but the concept was there. And Gilpin was somebody who was at the time the former governor of Colorado. He was Lincoln's personal bodyguard before that. He won Lincoln's trust, and Lincoln appointed him the first governor of Colorado. And before that, for 20 years, he was known as the father of Manifest Destiny, who was the first person in the 1840s to champion the idea of building the Transcontinental Railway, which finally got started during the Civil War and was finished in 1869. And his idea was, from the very beginning, and I think Lincoln probably got a lot of these ideas from Gilpin and some of his Russian friends, was to extend the transcontinental that ended in California all the way up through British Columbia into Alaska that Russia had just sold to the United States and onward into Eurasia, based on a concept of the greenbacks emitting productive credit and cooperating instead of fighting your neighbors. And that concept was, I think, very powerful. Even the Tsar Nicholas II commissioned a team of American engineers to go to Alaska to carry out feasibility studies in 1905 over the Bering Strait, and it was covered in the New York Times and Western press as well. Of course, some revolutions, some wars got in the way, and the world went in a different direction. But this is a very old idea, and to see that it's now being circulated again, this is something that was just released across mainstream media. With some of the JFK classified files that the Soviets had been holding on to, there was somewhere along the way an American civil engineer in the 60s who drew up, in a fanciful way, but I think an important idea in 1962, something that was playfully dubbed the Kennedy-Khrushchev World Peace Bridge, featuring just that very connection. And this is, I think, coming at a moment when we really need to be thinking big and thinking about these historical precedents. So it's not coming out of the blue. It's not coming out of a vacuum. It's not coming out of a Sims game. This has very real past and future importance. So everything you've just said, I appreciate so much. I hope people check out your longer 3.5-hour beautiful presentation in the description box of this video, as well as my 36-minute film, which will be screened at this film festival in Sochi. That's also going to be linked in the description box. Peter, thank you so very much.